When the E! True Hollywood story continues, Dean becomes America's most popular television star.
Dean Martin was, for me, one of the sexiest, sweetest, most professional people that I ever worked with.
And later, Dean drifts into solitude.
Truthfully, I don't think Dean knew what he was doing the last 6 years of his life.
The Rat Pack, including Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra, and Sammy Davis Jr., made films and raised hell together in the early 1960s. In 1963, their glory days came to a shattering close with an assassin's bullets in Dallas. The next decade would bring Dean great fame and great sorrow. The nation was shocked and demoralized following the 1963 assassination of President John Kennedy. Dean shared the pain. Dean's daughter recalls her father's reaction to the tragedy.
It hurt him, it hurt everybody. I don't know that if it was another, if it had been another president, if it would have hurt as badly, because Kennedy was so young and he was a friend.
The aftermath of the Kennedy assassination produced changes in every aspect of society, including the performing arts. Dean once owned the pop charts with hits like Volare, but now the Beatles were in, and Dean's kind of cool seemed old-fashioned. At 46, Dean ignored the winds of change, at least in the beginning. Former Capitol Records president Alan Livingston.
Dean didn't think about things that much. He didn't plan that carefully. He didn't plan his career. It happened. And it happened because of his talents, but it happened.
Dean's answer to the Beatles was an old-fashioned love ballad, tacked on to the tail end of a recording session. Jeanne Martin was there.
They didn't have a song to finish one in a record session, and Ken Lane said, well, I've got this song, and so they said, well, let's just do it.
Everybody loves somebody sometime. Although that day was overdue.
By summer 1964, Everybody Loves Somebody rose to the top of the pop charts, knocking the Beatles out of first place. It was Dean's last big musical triumph.
He had a charm. He was a very charming man and a very attractive man, and he sang well. And he just used it and went with it, and it worked.
The Beatles, I sing better than all of them put together, and I'm younger than all of them put together.
Dean returned to movies in 1964 with mixed results. The film Kiss Me Stupid provided his first leading role after the Rat Pack years and played to the changing sexual values of the 60s.
Last night she was banging on my door for 45 minutes, but I wouldn't let her out.
Kiss Me Stupid was condemned by critics as lewd and smutty. The reviews wounded Dean's career, but as co-star Ray Walston recalls, they devastated the film's legendary director, Billy Wilder.
He had a track record that long of good films, hits. This was a flop. And I don't think he was very happy about that. And as a matter of fact, I don't think Dean was either.
Dean's next two films seemed cursed. Production of The Sons of Katie Elder was postponed when Dean's co-star, John Wayne, shocked the world by announcing he had cancer. Marriage on the Rocks with Sinatra and Deborah Kerr fizzled at the box office. But Dean followed up with the film The Silencers, launching his successful Matt Helm series.
I wanted to play Hamlet, but they talked me out of it, Anyway, I'm happy to be here to tell you all about a wonderful new picture called The Silencers. In it,
Martin played a campy James Bond character.
Now, do I look like an enemy agent?
I don't know. I haven't seen all the latest models yet.
Producer Doug Netter.
They were escape movies. The James Bond films were similar but not the same, really. And he therefore identified with his easygoing kind of character. I think the audience identified with it because there was great escape for everybody.
Miss Craves it?
Mr. Helm, Would you please call me by my first name?
Well, I don't know your first name.
It's Lovey.
Lovey craves it? Oh, that's some kind of name.
Although many kids in the 60s thought Dean was hokey, their parents loved him. Dean's next venture was a return to television. The Dean Martin Variety Show premiered on NBC in September of 1965. It was an hour of double entendres, racy jokes, and pretty girls, with a production schedule that was as laid back as its star. Frequent guest, Dom DeLuise.
Dean was like a performer who never rehearsed. He never rehearsed. I mean, I don't understand it. We rehearsed for a week. And Dean would come in, hey, Pally, how you doing, you know.
Instead of rehearsing, Dean let his guests rehearse. Then he ad-libbed. Another frequent guest was Charles Nelson Riley.
We would do sketches, and I would make sure I had the right word. I memorized them, and the cue cards were there. And then I knew my first line, and he would come in and say something entirely different, and it didn't match with what was on the card or what was in my mind. I remember coming home once from the studio. I had a convertible, and the script blew out of the car, and I thought, so what?
Regular guest Don Rickles.
When the show started, nobody knew what they were doing. That's how supportive Dean was. He just said, well, we're going to do the show now. And we all took naps because we had no idea. But it always came out great because he was so loose and easy.
By the end of its first season, the Dean Martin Variety Show commanded an astounding 38% of the nation's TV households every Thursday night. Another regular guest was Bob Newhart.
They just loved him, and for its time it was risque. I mean, you know, he talked about getting drunk, and there were the showgirls, and people just felt comfortable with him, just watching. They oh, that's our friend Dean, you know. Oh, he's nuts. He's crazy. Look what he's doing now. What? He's crazy. Dean's crazy. You know, there was a bond between he and the audience that isn't very easy to establish.
Dean's Variety Show ran 9 seasons on NBC. The program permanently imprinted Dean's brand of cool on the American television audience. But backstage, the show's guest stars saw the real Dean. Actress Florence Henderson.
Dean Martin, in my observation, was a very shy man. I don't think he was comfortable with strangers. I think he was comfortable doing what he did on the show because that was a persona. You know, he was playing this cool kind of guy who drank and, you know, had his share of women or all the women that he wanted. But I think in his actual life, I think he was very shy. I think very few people saw that side of Dean.
The 1960s raced by for Dean. His TV show made him a superstar, and his Matt Helm movies made him richer than ever. But for the former prizefighter, the decade wound down with a sobering 1-2 punch. On Christmas Day, 1966, Dean's beloved mother, Angela Crosetti, died. 8 months later, his father, Guy Crosetti, followed Angela to the grave. Years later, Dean shared his feelings with daughter Deanna.
He talked about, you know, his life and the things that he had done, and there were very few things that he was sorry about. But he was sorry that he didn't go to the hospital when his mother died. But he wasn't one who liked hospitals. You know, I think it frightened him. So he was sorry for some things that had happened, and yet he kept them inside.
When the True Hollywood story continues, Dean resurrects his youth with one more chorus of That's Amore.
She was gorgeous. She was absolutely gorgeous. Beautiful blonde with a fabulous figure.
And later, Dean's final farewell.
This was the first Christmas Eve that he didn't come to dinner, because he had made every other one. He had stayed home.
Dean Martin was one of the most visible men in show business during the early 1960s. The Dean Martin Show became a top 10 TV series, and Dean remained a favorite on the big screen and on the Las Vegas Strip. But the 70s decade of social change was about to melt down the king of cool.
There's trouble in the sky. There's trouble on the runways, and many lives hang in the balance.
The 1969 movie Airport restored Dean's image as a serious actor.
You'll kill yourself for nothing if you explode that bomb.
In the film, 52-year-old Dean played an adulterous airline pilot, and Jacqueline Bisset played his pregnant mistress, daughter Deanna Martin Griffith.
I would hear him sometimes rehearsing the lines. It was cute. But he knew exactly, he would say it 5 different ways. And then the next day he would go in, and he was very proud of that movie. And of course he loved Jacqueline Bisset. He just said, oh, she's just so beautiful.
Airport became one of the biggest money-making films of all time. But Dean's film role as a cheating spouse was about to spill over into his real life. Even son Ricky sensed problems.
I felt, as children can, I think in any family arena, that things were not healthy, that the folks weren't getting along. Never saw them argue. That was never an issue in the house. You could just feel it.
In 1969, after many years of performing at the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas, Dean moved his act to the Riviera. That fall, while singing at the Riviera, Dean met voluptuous model Gail Renshaw, Miss World USA. Hollywood columnist James Bacon.
Dean really fell for her, when the first time he saw her up there at the Riviera Hotel. And rightly so, she was gorgeous. She was absolutely gorgeous. Beautiful blonde with a fabulous figure. God, she had a great figure.
A month later, 52-year-old Dean Martin informed his wife Jeanne he wanted a divorce after 20 years of marriage. For Jeanne, it was a painful time.
I never stopped loving him. I just didn't want to live with him for a while. And that was a difficult decision because I did not want to put these children through a divorce. But there are just times when you have to do what you have to do.
Although Dean and Jeanne stayed married, Dean moved into the Beverly Hills Hotel and began wooing the 22-year-old Renshaw.
What is a midlife crisis? I don't know. He didn't tell me. He didn't tell me why. He just said, I love your mother very much, but it's time for me to go.
But 6 months after the romance began, Dean abruptly ended his affair with Gail Renshaw without a word of explanation.
I went out in the town one night with Gail, and she told me she still loved Dean and told me to tell Dean that when I got back, and I told him that, yeah. He didn't make any comment. He didn't even raise his eyebrows.
In the summer of 1970, Dean began hitting the singles scene. At a Hollywood disco, he met another beauty, Kathy May Hawn, a newly divorced 23-year-old beauty salon receptionist. Again, 53-year-old Dean fell in love.
You have to realize that people like Dean Martin and Sinatra and them, they have temptations the ordinary man never sees. I mean, they got women throwing themselves at them all the time. And usually young, gorgeous women, so it's very hard to resist.
But Dean's latest crush became more than a fling. He soon developed a close bond with Kathy Hawn, and with Sasha, Hawn's 5-year-old daughter from her previous marriage.
That was important to him. She's a great gal, and he loved her dearly. That was one of his concerns, He wanted to adopt Sasha.
After dating Kathy over a year, Dean finally filed for divorce from his wife Jeanne. Valentine's Day, 1972.
I mean, I'm too intelligent a woman to not understand. Most marriages end up in divorce. That's why I think 23 years was a pretty good run. And I never lost respect for him, ever.
Martin's divorce settlement cost him a reported $6.5 million. In 1973, Kathy Hawn became Dean's third wife.
Kathy was full of life. She was young. She wanted to do lots of things. She had a beautiful daughter, Sasha, that Dad adopted. Kathy was fun and different and outspoken, and he liked that. He liked that a lot.
As Dean began marriage number 3, his career began a serious slide. The trouble started with a notorious rift with Riviera Hotel president Eddie Torres. Former Las Vegas Bell captain Lou Pearl.
Dean was getting tired of working 2 shows, and he said, I'd like to work 1 show. And this guy Torres was A no-nonsense guy. He's get your stuff out of the dressing room. Our party is over.
In 1974, there was more bad news. After 9 seasons on the air, sagging ratings forced cancellation of the Dean Martin variety show. For many of Dean's regular guests, the end came as a harsh blow.
It was the end of an era that you never thought would end. I just always thought there would be a Dean Martin show. It was it was sad. It was very sad when it went off.
Interest started fading, and then, as it does for everything, you know, it peaks, and I think it did break a lot of new ground in variety television.
There's a life for a television show, and I just think it stops unless it's 60 minutes. You know what I'm saying? I think it's enough already. I think he was tired of it.
By 1974, 56-year-old Dean was back on a Las Vegas stage, this time at the MGM Hotel. That same year, MGM released Dean's 54th movie, Mr. Rico, produced by Dean's old friend Doug Netter.
I thought he did a fine job on Mr. Rico. It didn't do as well as we would have liked. That was a departure for Dean because it was a crime-busting attorney with which he played straight. There were not the fun, the games, the jokes of the Matt Helms.
But Mr. Rico was trashed in movie reviews. Dean's performance in the title role was especially criticized, and the film became a box office dud. With Dean's career now on shaky ground in 1976, his third marriage began to crumble. That June, he suddenly left the Malibu home he shared with 28-year-old wife, Kathy.
Maybe he couldn't keep up with her because she was, you know, so young. I've known that with a lot of people, you know, a lot of older men who go with younger women. And, you know, for a while it's good, and then they just can't keep up anymore.
After just 3 years of marriage, Dean and Kathy divorced in 1976. Whatever the reasons, Dean kept them inside.
You know, maybe he jumped into it too quickly. I don't know. You know, I really don't know. I have no idea.
When the E! True Hollywood story continues, Dean and Jerry, a teary reunion after 20 years.
This comes from a kid that was brought up in Steubenville with an Italian family that told him, if you cry, you're a sissy, you know.
And later, the family tragedy that haunted Dean's last years.
I knew what Dean Paul wanted of me, and so I just went on. But Dean didn't.
In the mid-1970s, Dean Martin's storied life was crashing down around him. He parted with his wife of 20 years, Jeanne, only to have his third marriage to Kathy Hahn also end in divorce. His television series was canceled, film roles dried up, and Dean wasn't cool anymore.
I ain't no dummy, you know. I went to Penn State for 3 years.
Oh, Penn State?
State Penn.
State Penn.
Dean Martin was 58 years old and becoming more burned out than laid back. He was also caring less about being Dean Martin. In 1975, he agreed to a 5-year contract for a series of NBC specials called Dean Martin's Celebrity Roasts. But unlike the fresh irreverence of Dean's old variety series, the roasts were scripted, heavily edited, and laden with canned laughter. Frequent guest Don Rickles.
I used to just go and do the shows, and they just had, like in a room like this, a bare room, and they'd have cardboard pictures of people up. And I'd pretend that I was really talking to them, and I would go one by one and make up stuff, and they'd keep the cameras rolling, and I put in the laugh track, and I always looked like a big hit. And I was talking to cardboard.
The Dean Martin roasts failed to restore his popularity with TV viewers, or with guests. Comic Bob Newhart.
Don Rickles did a lot of them. Foster Brooks did a lot of them and was very funny. I guess I did a couple. I'm not sure how many I did, but it really wasn't my. It wasn't my kind of humor.
In 1976, Dean's career was at a standstill when he found an unexpected friend in his estranged partner, Jerry Lewis.
20 years passed. We hadn't spoken. In 20 years, with the exception of when one of the children were hurt, I called him, he called me. But in 20 years, we had very little contact. And I missed him very much.
Martin and Lewis were reunited when Frank Sinatra brought Dean out as a surprise guest on Jerry's annual Labor Day telethon.
It was like watching this great giant, you know, in my mind and my heart. He was always this humongous man who could just do whatever was necessary, in my eyes, because he was my hero. He was always my hero.
But Dean's reunion with Jerry did not restore their partnership. As the 1970s drew to a close, Dean worked less every year. Even his stage act was growing stale in the town that had once brought him success, Las Vegas.
I think what ruined him in Las Vegas, he never changed his act. I could do his act. I've seen it so many times, you know. You come out and, oh, how long have I been here now, you know? Geez, God.
Dean's creative efforts continued to wane as he passed his 60th birthday in 1977. He reestablished a close friendship with his former wife, Jeanne, and even though remarriage wasn't in the cards, Dean began spending more time with his 7 children.
He was already disenchanted about performing. You know, he wasn't having a ball in Vegas anymore. That part of it was just tired of it, you know. But we were enjoying ourselves over here, you know, Jeanne and him getting back together and us being a family together, if you will.
Dean also learned how to be a grandfather.
We'd go to Catalina or something, he'd be fishing and suddenly his arm would be around me. And fishing or card tricks, every card, I was a dealer once, and then the hands would come down and palm a deck of cards and show me card tricks for literally like 2 hours. We'd all be playing poker, and then he'd nudge me and then show me a trick like, here's how you do that, by the way there, pal. You slam it down and it flips over, just like, here you go.
How's your love life?
Well, I'm going to tell you something.
What?
It seems that you and me are the only ones in town that aren't married.
In 1980, Dean was rediscovered by television. At age 63, Martin became an ad pitchman for AT&T. He also popped up occasionally on talk and variety shows and reminisced about the Rat Pack.
Well, I remember one night he started dancing, he got all through, and I don't know, I just picked him up and I said,
I'd like to thank the NAACP for this wonderful trophy.
Dean won another movie role in 1980.
Oh, I gotta bless her.
He was chosen to play a phony priest in the film spoof The Cannonball Run, co-starring some of his old pals. Director of The Cannonball Run, Hal Needham.
I think he was just doing it for the fun of it and the hell of it, because he had a lot of money. He wasn't doing it for the few bucks we were paying him. I think it was just fun and games and something for him to do.
To the surprise of many, The Cannonball Run became one of the biggest hits of 1981, earning $37 million at the box office. In 1984, the inevitable sequel, Cannonball Run 2, not only brought back Dean, but also Frank, Sammy, even Rat Pack pal Shirley MacLaine. The old gang was reunited.
I'll tell you something, the day Sinatra came on the set, the one day he worked, everybody, every actor, even though they didn't have a call that day, they were all there. And you're talking about, now you're talking about reminiscing. When the 4 of them got together, I mean, it was fun to just sit around and listen to them, and the whole crew was just entertained.
However, unlike its predecessor, Cannonball Run 2 was ridiculed by critics and quickly died at the box office. In 1985, when Dean was 68 years old, he tried to revive his trademark cool by playing himself in the NBC series Half Nelson. But the show was canceled after 6 episodes. In 1986, Dean retreated from public life, as ex-wife Jeanne recalls.
He was tired, he was bored with it. And he did not want to continue doing something that he couldn't give his, be enthusiastic about.
In 1987, fate dealt Dean a final devastating blow. It involved his beloved son, Dean Paul Martin Jr., or Dino to friends and family. a dashing and gifted actor, tennis pro, and Air National Guard captain. On March 20th, 1987, Dino disappeared on a routine training flight over California's remote San Bernardino Mountains. The F-4C Phantom jet Dino was piloting simply vanished from radar, leaving the Martin family in shock.
Certainly wasn't dead. That was the last thing on our mind. We just had to find him. And as day after day after day went on, we realized that we're not finding him. They are not finding him. You know, you turn on the news, there it was. You know, the helicopters are out, the weather, the reporters in their, you know, in their parkas, and the snow is flying, and then they still can't find him. The U.S. government couldn't find him. You know, Reagan could not find him.
5 days later, fragments of Dino's plane were found scattered across the landscape. His jet fighter had plunged 4,000 feet in a fog, smashing into the mountain with terrific impact. Dino's son and Dean's grandson, Alex, remembers hearing the news.
I do remember the moment when the general came, actually in this house, came in and sat down next to my grandfather and said to him and the family, we were all around and we were all very close, you know, the United States government is sorry to inform you that your son has passed away. And I remember the implosion of my grandfather sitting in this chair, actually. The sinking that happened. And that moment has stayed with me.
Dean was crushed by his son's death. The cool he had so carefully cultivated his entire life finally collapsed. Dino's memorial service was attended by longtime friends and celebrities, including Rat Pack pal Sammy Davis Jr. and Dean's one-time partner, Jerry Lewis. But afterward, Dean was inconsolable.
We talked on the phone that night for about an hour and a half, and he let it all out. I had never seen Dean cry. I'd never heard him cry. But I think, in retrospect, that was the night that Dean died. The night that Dino got killed.
At age 69, Dean was a broken man. He spent the next year in mourning. Then in 1988, Dean reunited with his Rat Pack pals for an extended concert series, the Together Again Tour. Dean walked out after a week.
He had done it. He had done it all. And he was just tired, and he didn't want to have to put up with it anymore.
By 1989, it was all over for Dean. The King of Cool was gone. It was obvious to everyone that his spirit had been obliterated in the plane crash that took his son.
He did not know how to handle that. See, I knew what Dean Paul wanted of me, and so I just went on. But Dean didn't. It just took so much out of him. You know, could never come to terms with it. My life will never be the same again. I'll never know joy as I knew it before, ever. But for him, it was devastating.
1990 brought one more blow. That year, close friend Sammy Davis Jr. died of throat cancer. When the E! True Hollywood story continues, Dean's Christmas Eve farewell.
Christmas Eve is not the same. It'll never be the same.
The 1987 death of Dean Martin's son, Dino, plunged the Martin family into mourning. Dean himself was consumed by grief. The 1990 death of longtime pal Sammy Davis Jr. sent Dean into a final tailspin.
Good friends dying, your son dying, your mother, your father, his brother, everybody, it's like, who's next?
By 1990, Dean Martin became a ghost of the beloved performer he had once been. That summer, at age 73, Dean attempted one more Las Vegas engagement at Bally's Resort, but found he was unable to stand up on stage and he had trouble using the microphone.
I remember being in Vegas with him in his room, and he's saying, "Pally, I'm just not going on tonight. I just can't do it. I can't hit the boards. I'm not going to do it."
Dean's engagement lasted only a few nights at Bally's. In June 1990, he closed the books on a show business career that spanned more than half a century. By late 1990, Dean's only public outings were nightly trips to a favorite Beverly Hills restaurant. At first it was La Familia, then Da Vinci. Each night he sat at the same table and ordered the same meal. A plate of spaghetti washed down with scotch and followed by memories. Restaurateur Dominique De Niccolo.
He used to tell me stories. He used to tell me that he was a blackjack dealer at one time, everything about his life, you know. And to me, I always felt that he lived like a very happy life.
The superstar who once attracted legions of fans dined in solitude. Longtime friend Alan Livingston.
My wife and I would go up and say hello to him, and for a minute I wasn't sure he knew who we were. He was kind of foggy and out of it. He was very, very much alone.
Dean's health deteriorated throughout the 1990s. After a lifetime of heavy smoking, he suffered from emphysema and his breathing became difficult. Dean's gaunt appearance alarmed former partner Jerry Lewis.
I'd always get on the phone, he'd say, "Hi, preacher." I say, "Yeah, I'm going to preach to you, you son of a bitch, you're not paying attention. What is this crap? Why aren't you eating? And what is this? What are these terrible pictures that's shooting at you?" "Okay, preacher, what do you want me to do?" I said, "Take better care of yourself, you schmuck. You got the whole world in your pocket."
Dean did not take care of himself. In 1995, he gave up his solitary dinners in Beverly Hills, and by December, Dean stopped eating entirely. Former wife Jeanne Martin.
He didn't have surgery. He wasn't in pain. He just didn't want to live anymore. And I, of course, would have no way of knowing why, but he just didn't.
At 3:15 a.m. Christmas Day 1995, 78-year-old Dean Martin quietly drew his last breath. Daughter Deanna remembers.
On Christmas Eve, and we're at this wonderful party at my mother's, and my husband and I usually are the last to go anyways at parties, and we stayed with Mother, and we were talking. And we were there until about 3:45, and we found out when we got home that Dad had died at about 3:15. And it's not so much that we knew that it was happening, but it was, you could feel it. The odd thing is that, and I don't know if anyone remembers this, my grandmother, his mother died at the same time, 30 years before that, about 3:15, 3 o'clock, 3:15. And it was pretty uncanny that he would leave us right then.
The official cause of Dean's death was acute respiratory failure brought on by emphysema. Dean died exactly as he had lived, with no fuss, stoic strength, and an unmatched brand of cool.
It's like he's not gone anyways. You know, I can walk into a store, a restaurant, and there, you know, his albums are playing. You know, you turn on the TV and there he is. It's like he's still here. He's definitely in my heart, and he's in all of our hearts.
He loved to work. He sang with great ease so that you didn't know that he was any effort, and it didn't look like it was any effort at all. He worked effortlessly at a job that he loved.
Only I know he was as scared as I was. But he had this wonderful ability to cover his nervousness. He had this impeccable ability to let everyone think that he's the only one in the joint that doesn't care.
He had a God-given humor that he blessed everybody with, and I'm certain that the mention of Dean Martin will and should bring a smile to everybody's face that either knew him or saw him perform, and that's the way to remember him, with the smile.
He was magic, in the best sense of the word.
At 7 p.m. December 28, 1995, during a private memorial service, Dean's remains were interred near the vaults of his parents. At that same hour, Las Vegas paid Dean a final tribute. The star of 57 movies, hundreds of television shows, and the voice of almost 1,000 recordings, had brightened marquees on the desert strip for more than 3 decades. As Dean was being laid to rest, Las Vegas hotels dimmed their lights in a parting toast to the immortal Dean Martin.
I imagine Dean got to Heaven's Gate and St. Peter opened the gates. Hey, baby, would you like to have a little toddy with me? And he entered heaven.
På TV1000, en del av Viasat. Det här programmet är olämpligt